Dave Birkett joins us now here on 97.1 The Ticket. And Dave, you really stirred the pot with this this story, this column, I guess, this mock draft and all these scenarios. Because I think, seriously, Dave, if you had spent 5 days releasing each of these possibilities, one per day, we could have got 2 hours out of each one. And you released them all at once. So
sorry.
It's quite all right. We're not expecting you to consult with us before you write.
Speak for yourself.
So I do love the idea. Like, I guess my takeaway is you really think that Brad Holmes, because of what he said and because of where they sit, trading down is a I don't know if I'd say probability, but it is maybe more likely than in years past.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't say probability. I mean, really, Doug, this came out of I was going to have Tyree Wilson go to the Lions with the 6th pick for like the 3rd time in 4 mock drafts, and I was like, okay, let's do a little something different. You know what I mean? This is I don't know if that's who I'm sort of zeroing in on, just because I still don't know exactly how they feel about Jalen Carter, and he seems the most likely to be there. But I do get the sense that, in judging, based a little bit on what Brad said at the annual meeting last week, there just doesn't seem to be that guy at 6 that the Lions will be rushing to the podium for. And maybe that's, changes, or maybe he's downplaying that a little bit, and maybe it's Jalen Carter. But I think a lot of the players that they'll be picking from at 6 would be the same player that they're picking from at 11. And so if that's the case, and if a team does want to go up to get a quarterback, be it a Will Levis or if an Anthony Richardson falls, then maybe that's something that Brad can trade down, accumulate some extra draft capital, and really I think maybe adding an extra pick in 2024 is important, because that potentially could be a deeper draft, and the Lions have a pretty young roster right now, so any additional capital they can add in the future would be a good thing.
Is it safe to say that later this month, when Jalen Carter meets and has his visit with the Lions, that it might be the most important visit that the Lions have had in a long, long time, because of this guy's talent level where it is, and then everything comes crumbling down right before the combine begins with the charges and all that, and then he has his pro day a couple weeks later, and all the mess that was, and maybe not, saying the right things at the right time here. But how important is this meeting he's got?
No, I think you're right about that, because, exactly the first reason you mentioned, he is such a premium talent, right? I mean, this could have been the first pick of the draft had everything gone right for him, had the Bears kept that pick. Everyone has seen what he's done the past 2 seasons at Georgia, helping that team win 2 national championships. And then the fit, that's what the Lions need the most, is like an interior pass rushing presence to sort of, complete that defensive line. So there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle there when it comes to the Lions, and why that's important, and why he, should be the pick, or would be the pick if there weren't some of these off-field questions. I do think, though, in talking to some people, it's as much as, the racing incident has, been a cloud over his draft stock, and, certainly from a legal perspective, he's put some of that behind him. It does sound like there were some legitimate questions about his work ethic, practice habits, going back to last season. And so, I know Todd McShay, I think it was, had sort of referenced that in December, and people kind of got up in arms. But as things stand right now, I think those are the bigger questions than anything that has to do with the accident. I think it's about, okay, how much is this guy really going to work? How much is he going to fit into our locker room? And when you give him all the money and all the glory that comes with, potentially being an NFL star, what does that do to him? So that's what I think the Lions and these other teams are trying to find out.
Yeah, and I guess it goes back to what Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes have said at the owners' meetings about, can you handle a guy like that isn't maybe the best character guy, when do you have enough character guys on your team that they can absorb something like that? But in the end, you still have him going 5th overall.
I do, and as I wrote in the mock draft today, I think part of that was, again, in talking to some people at the owners' meetings last week, I had asked one GM, just, okay, where do you think is the most likely landing spot for Jalen Carter? And he said Seattle, and I guess it makes sense, right? You look at the Seahawks history with taking chances on some character risks. Malik McDowell, everyone knows that one here, and that was lower in the draft, obviously. But another team that shouldn't have a top 5 pick based on where they finished last year and does. So maybe it's one that they can roll the dice on a little bit. And I think, Jalen Carter is very much the wild card. I put him at 5 in this mock. The last mock I had the Lions passing on him at 6. I don't have a great sense of where he's going to go. And I think you're right, Gator, that what he does and how he handles these visits coming up, I think that'll be super important to whether he's a top 5 pick, a top 10 pick, or maybe falls into the teens.
Dave Birkett, Free Press, at Dave Birkett on Twitter, Lions Insider. And so you painted out 5 scenarios, and then when you went to your mock, you chose one of the scenarios, and it was scenario 3. The Lions move down 5 spots from 6 to 11. They get Tennessee's 3rd-round choice at 72 and a 2nd-rounder next year. And at 11, they take Bijan Robinson, running back, Texas. What made you settle on this as the most likely trade back scenario?
Well, I think, and I don't know anything going on in Vegas, but, there have been reports recently that the Raiders just aren't enamored with this quarterback class and, wouldn't be looking to move up unless it was for a guy like, Bryce Young. And so, I guess it's probably not. I think 7 maybe is a little bit unlikely. The last scenario I had was trading with the Washington Commanders. I don't see them as wanting to go up that high and having to pay the premium. The Falcons at number 8, I guess, are a possibility. But, Tennessee is the team that strikes me as the team that most needs a quarterback and maybe is most willing to move up to get one of these guys. And I guess so that's the one that I went with. And I don't know that Bijan Robinson will be a popular pick, but, look, I think you could roundly ask just about any draft analyst and he'd tell you that the guy is one of the top 5 talents in the draft. And, the way I had my mock playing out, Tyree Wilson was gone and Devin Witherspoon was gone and, Skoronski was gone if you want an offensive tackle. So, I think Christian Gonzalez was gone too. So I think I had both the top cornerbacks and all 3 of the top defensive linemen gone. So, look, Brad Holmes is a guy that it's talent above everything. And I look back at what the Rams did when they took Todd Gurley in the 1st round and how they built that team. And I sort of go back to what, Brad and Dan have said the last couple of years about wanting to put, the right cast, a really good supporting cast around Jared Goff. And running backs may not make a lot of sense to people in the 1st round high, but I think there is value in getting a 5th-year option on a guy. There's value in getting that running back the best 5 years of his career. And especially if you're a contending team, like we expect the Lions to be next year, it makes sense that you can really add a dynamic presence to the offense.
What do you say to the people right now screaming, no, defense, because we get that all the time?
Well, I think the Lions are very much in tune with still upgrading that defense. I mean, they added 3 defensive backs in free agency, but, they have 1 cornerback that is signed beyond this year. So that's still a need, right? And they need, I mentioned defensive tackle, right? That's probably still their biggest need, a pass rushing defensive tackle. And if they can get a linebacker, that would help. I wrote, I think it's up on freak.com, Drew Sanders from Arkansas is coming in for a pre-draft visit next week. So, they are still doing their diligence on all these defensive players. And I do expect them to have probably a defense heavy draft, but, I think ultimately, as Brad Holmes said last week, he doesn't have a depth chart in his draft room for a reason. He doesn't want to be swayed by, some of the positional needs, and he just wants to go based on top talent available. And if that's the case, even taking positional value into account, I think Bijan Robinson is the top talent given the other players that I had coming off the board in the first 10 picks.
You're not new to this situation. You know how fans feel. The quarterback position is always up for debate. Anthony Richardson at 6 seems like it could be a possibility that he's there at 6. Whether or not the Lions want to invest in that is a different story. I'm a big Hendon Hooker guy. I'm warming up to the idea that I would take him at 18 because if you're going to stash him for a year anyway, why not? And or perhaps moving up from a 2nd round to get back into the 1st round just so you get that 5th year for Hendon Hooker. Is that a possibility? What are you hearing about Hendon Hooker and his popularity? What do you hear about the possibility of Anthony Richardson? Or is it just they're going to take a quarterback, but it's going to be much later in the draft?
I think they will take a quarterback later in the draft. Can't rule one out, I guess, early, but look, I've had some, conversations with people in the building, and it just doesn't seem like they want to go that route. I mean, they want to build up that defense, and they want to add parts that are really going to help them now. And they frankly like, Jared Goff and think that they can win with Jared Goff. And Richardson he's another wild card. I mean, supreme talent. I know there's a lot of people that want to gamble on that. And I've been on record for several years now with saying I think the Lions need to, find that, they're Patrick Mahomes, right? Take a chance on a guy like that. But I'm also keen to know that my job doesn't rest on me making that draft pick, and, Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell and their job does. And so, there is a bust factor there. And so I don't get any sense that the Lions will draft a quarterback high. And guys, I would tell you that, look, if the Lions were going to take a quarterback at 6, or if that was a realistic possibility, I think we would see them have private workouts with all these guys and bring these guys in for visits, because that is such an important position. You're not drafting a quarterback unless you see him live and in person throw the ball and get a chance to sit down with him for a couple hours and pick his brain on offense. And, and the fact that the Lions haven't done that, has really kind of confirmed, what I've been led to believe, that they won't take a quarterback high. So Hooker, is that a possibility? I think so. Maybe if he's there in round 2, there's value in getting a 5th-year on him, obviously, but, the age and the fact that he played in a half-field read offense are certainly things that hold his draft stock back a little bit.
Okay, at 18, guys that were on the board include Kalijah Cansey, the defensive tackle from Pitt, Osiris Torrance, the guard from Florida, Quentin Johnston, the wide receiver from TCU. You got 2 corners, Emmanuel Forbes and Deontay Banks on the board, Michael Mayer, the tight end from Notre Dame, on the board, but the selection is defensive end Myles Murphy from Clemson. Tell us why you go with him.
And I did think about some of those cornerbacks there. I think I had the Lions take Banks in one of my previous mocks. And again, that's a long-term need, but it's a deeper position cornerback. You can maybe get, a contributor a little bit later on. In going by the way that Brad has wanted to build this thing, I think, the Lions are very important, offensive line and defensive line. And, Murphy's a guy that, obviously he had some production at Clemson. I think once upon a time he probably was considered a top 10 type pick, and he's versatile enough that he can play an important role on that young defensive line. So I just thought, given the positional value, given, I guess, the upside for him as a prospect and maybe the depth of the draft at some other positions, I think he's definitely a possibility if they don't go defensive line at 6.
Lastly, Dave,
or wherever they trade down to.
Lastly, you had a bunch of scenarios of trading back. What about the scenario of trading up to get Will Anderson at 3?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I know people want that to happen too, right? Will Anderson obviously is, he's like the best, cleanest prospect in the draft, if that makes sense. I mean, the guy obviously had a really good career at Bama, and, scouts love him, and, he is going to be the first defensive player taken, I think. I just don't know that, Arizona wants to move down to 6, A, B, that the Lions want to spend what it's going to cost to move up, given that, the Cardinals, could then miss out on both of the top defensive linemen. Look, Will Anderson would be I think he's going to be an excellent NFL player, but, I think the Lions need some interior line help more. I think there's some other good options that would be available if you hold on to that draft capital and you keep 6 and 18. So, can never rule it out, but I just think that's a little bit less likely than the trade down scenario if one of those quarterbacks makes it to 6.
Dave Birkett, you can read the story on freep.com. Very intriguing. We got a lot to talk about. Thank you for your time, and we'll catch up soon.
All right. No problem, guys. We'll talk to you again.
Thanks, Dave.
Lions insider Dave Birkett here on 97.1 The Ticket.